You were never meant to hear this. Not in school. Not from your parents. Not from history books lined with polished lies. But it's always been there, whispered between the cracks of sealed family vaults, buried beneath foundations soaked in blood. America was not built by dreams, it was constructed by dynasties, bloodlines, families who vanished, not because they died out, but because they chose to disappear. They left behind no heirs, no graves, no photographs, just shadows. And if you trace those shadows far enough, you'll find names erased from records, symbols etched behind fireplace bricks, mansions swallowed by forests, and children who never reached adulthood. Not because they died young, but because they were taken. Tonight I'm going to tell you about them. All of them. The lost families, the forgotten rulers, the architects of silence. But you have to understand something before we begin. This is not entertainment. This is not myth. This is transformation. Every revelation will strip a layer off the illusion you've been wrapped in since birth. Because once you see the machinery, the gears behind the history, you will not return to who you were. You'll understand why certain families vanished from public view, and why others rose like phoenixes, only to burn everything around them. You'll learn how blood isn't just thicker than water. It's currency. It's contract. It's control. There's a reason why you were taught to idolize broken icons instead of question their creators. Why they handed you stories of freedom while hiding the ones forged in ritual, greed, and predatory legacy. This isn't a story, it's a severance. And it begins where all forbidden truth lives, not in what they told you, but in what they erased. Take a breath. Because once this descent begins, you don't crawl back into ignorance. You fall. Welcome to the macabre history of America's lost bloodlines. We begin with the family that controlled Virginia's soil before the Constitution was inked. A family whose children spoke in reverse tongues, and who fed their legacy with something far darker than gold. Let's begin before George Washington ever raised a musket, before Thomas Jefferson ever scratched his quill across the parchment of independence. There was the Arledge family. Whispers say they owned half of Virginia in 1721, not by purchase or royal grant, but by blood oath, land deeds sealed with wax and something else. Something warm, no portraits remain, only fragments. A charred family crest unearthed by a construction crew near Richmond in 1978, never shown to the public. Filed under private estate dispute, and then sealed by federal order. The crest bore a three-headed raven, one beak devouring a crown, the second a lamb, the third a serpent. Around it Latin, not taught in schools. But their real power wasn't the land, it was the ritual they guarded beneath it. The Arledge crypts were dug deep, too deep. 11 levels beneath the manor, each with a different architectural style. Etruscan, Norse, something older, something not listed on any archaeological record. And at the very bottom, stone tablets? Not written, but carved into the stone by heat. As if something had burned the language into the rock itself. Witnesses describe the children of the Arledge family walking backwards at dusk. Not for play. For training. They were taught to unlearn the linear world. Taught to see reality in reverse. And when the revolution began, the Arledges didn't fight. They vanished, overnight, no flames, no screams, no exodus, just gone. Manor gates open, horses tied and foaming, tables set for dinner, food half eaten, but not a single soul, except one. A boy found standing in the center of the grand hall, barefoot, soaked in something not his own. He was humming, but not in melody, in code. He repeated the same words over and over. We fed the stone. The stone is full. Now it waits. They say his mouth kept moving even after he was sedated, even after the body stopped. The boy was taken to a federal facility outside Annapolis. That record, too, was sealed. But not before a nurse wrote a single sentence in the margin of the file. His blood wasn't red. Understand this. The foundation of this country wasn't laid in freedom. It was sacrificed into place. And the ones who laid it, they didn't lose power. They left the room. Next, we travel north to a family who kept their daughters underground, because they believed the sky was watching. They never let the daughters see the sky. The Whitlock family of Massachusetts arrived in 1743, years before Salem's embers fully cooled. But unlike the Puritans who feared witches, the Whitlocks feared something else. They believed the stars were not points of light. They were eyes, watching, recording, judging. So the Whitlock daughters were not raised in bedrooms. They were raised underground, in brick-lined chambers beneath the house, masked by floorboards and silence. No windows, no names, just symbols. Each girl was tattooed at birth, not ink but ash, mixed with bone dust, pressed into the skin with heat and prayer. Their forearms bore a spiral wrapped in thorns. Their lips, soon shut for the first 7 years, not surgically, but ritually, threaded every night. unthreaded only to feed. You weren't meant to hear this. The family's patriarch Elias Wetlock kept journals. Only 4 pages survive. The rest were burned by state officials in 1932 after an unexplained fire consumed the Wetlock house. But those 4 pages were found, wrapped in lambskin, beneath the hearth of the ruins. They were never published. But I've read them. And in them, Elias wrote, "To raise daughters under the stars is to invite the remembering. The sky records sin, and daughters shine too bright. We bury them not to punish, but to protect. From the ones who come when the sky blinks red." It sounds insane, right? Until you realize the fire that destroyed the Whitlock home occurred on the same night as the 1932 red aurora borealis, one that reached as far south as Georgia. And according to local legend, in the minutes before the fire, a young girl, covered in soot, barefoot, eyes reflecting the red sky like mirrors, was seen standing at the edge of the forest. She was humming a melody no one could place, her mouth sewn, yet her voice clear. The girl walked backward into the trees, vanished. But in the days that followed, locals began reporting dreams. Vivid, terrifying, the same girl in each one, whispering, offering knowledge in exchange for silence. And every dream ended the same way, with a phrase carved into the dreamer's memory: "The sky remembers what the earth hides." Think about that. How many families weren't just strange, but guardians of something we were never meant to access? You see, this isn't folklore. It's infrastructure. You were raised on stories to distract you from the design. Next, we head west, to a family whose bloodline could not die, because it wasn't entirely human. You've been taught that blood is just biology, a fluid, a fact. But some families knew better. They believed blood was a signal, a transmitter, and in the Colorado Territory, before it ever became a state, there lived a family that claimed their blood didn't just carry memory, it carried command. The Kellich family, 1829, settled near the base of a mountain that doesn't appear on modern maps. Locals call it the sleeping bone. Native tribes avoided it, said it hummed when lightning struck too close. The Kellacks built a home from black stone, not quarried, excavated. The foundation stones were smooth, curved, and ancient, predating colonial presence by centuries. And their children, pale, not sickly, but untouched, they didn't scar. Their eyes reflected light like an animal's at night. Their voices developed early, chanting before they could form sentences. Visitors reported strange behavior. Doors that opened when no one touched them. Lights flickering when a Kellec entered the room. One sheriff claimed the youngest daughter spoke directly into his mind. He left the next day, shot himself 2 towns over. But here's where it spirals into the forbidden. When disease came through the valley in 1837, cholera, they said, it decimated every nearby household. Dozens of deaths. Yet not one Kellec died. Not even a cough. A town doctor, curious and brave, or foolish, came to examine their blood. He took a vial, sent it east for testing. But when the sample arrived in New York, the lab assistant who opened it began screaming, uncontrollably. He tore off his clothes, scratched his own eyes out, and then he spoke a language no one could identify. Over and over. The vial, it evaporated, no trace, no residue. But the assistant left behind one final message, written in his own blood across the walls. It remembers. That's the word that keeps returning. Remembers, because this isn't about superstition. This is about recall, about consciousness stored in bloodlines. A record, not of events, but of agreements. You think ancient knowledge was lost. But it wasn't. It was preserved. Inside the bodies of families that refused to dilute themselves. They didn't marry outsiders. They didn't travel. They remained exactly as they were, because the signal had to be clean. And then, they too vanished. No records, no descendants, just one photograph. A family of 6, standing in a circle, holding hands, eyes glowing faintly. And in the background, on the ridge of that unmarked mountain, a 7th figure, watching. We are not just talking about sinister families. We're talking about an unbroken chain of control. And if you're still listening, you've already begun to feel it. Next, we go deeper. To the family that invented obedience. Control is not maintained through war. It's not held by money, it's engineered. In 1851, tucked deep inside the Appalachian Ridge near Ashwood, Tennessee, lived a family known only by a symbol. 3 vertical lines crossed by a horizontal one. No surname, no census, no paper trail. But locals knew them. They called them the Stillmakers. The name wasn't about moonshine. It was about stillness. Silence. Total obedience. Children in that house didn't cry. Wives didn't speak unless spoken to. Men nodded before thinking. And it wasn't fear. It was design. The family had developed something they called resonance. A ritual frequency of tones, played on handmade instruments crafted from hollowed trees, animal bone, and thin strings made from braided hair. The tones were low, subtle, played only at dawn and dusk, almost imperceptible. But if you stood near the house, they'd vibrate in your teeth. They'd pull something inside you still. Visitors described strange reactions, shivering, hallucinations, memory lapses. One woman claimed she forgot her own name for 3 days. But within the house, things were orderly. Too orderly. The stillmaker patriarch, who wore mirrored glasses even at night, kept books of behavior codes. Thousands of entries, mapped to tone sequences. He believed every human reaction could be replicated, refined, and overwritten. Obedience not as submission, but as installed software. And then it got darker. A traveling priest came to the property in 1862. His last recorded sermon was bizarre, scattered, filled with references to the hollow sun, the quiet beneath the flesh, and the final echo. He vanished the next morning. The local sheriff entered the house with 3 deputies. Only one returned, silent, shaking, unable to walk on his own. He'd carved something into his own leg with a belt buckle. We are not free. We are tuned. The house was burned to the ground days later. But not by locals, by federal men. No uniforms, no insignia, just cold, precise efficiency. The hill it stood on was flattened, turned into a federal wildlife reserve. No trespassing. Ever since. Understand what I'm saying? Obedience in society is not accidental. It's been tested, perfected, and distributed. Like a software patch you never knew you downloaded. Think about the way your spine straightens when you hear sirens. The way your voice lowers around a badge. The way silence creeps into you when an authority figure enters the room. You think you chose that. You were tuned. Now we move into the 6th chamber of descent, where the bloodlines stop hiding and start recruiting. Every man receives it, but almost none of them recognize it. Not in the moment. Not until years later, when the dream returns. A door that wasn't there before. A letter with no stamp. An offer that doesn't look like one. But those who see it, those who feel it, they're never the same. Because some bloodlines don't vanish. They evolve. They adapt. And they recruit. Not with swords, not with money, with silence, with symbols. In the early 1900s, there was a pattern. Men in banking, oil, steel, powerful men began withdrawing from public life after reaching a certain peak, retiring early, divesting, disappearing. And when asked why, their answers were all the same. I've been called. No one questioned it, because wealth forgives everything. But behind the scenes, records surfaced, quietly. Letters found in attics, diaries half-burned, and they all pointed back to a singular origin. A group known only as the Covenant of 7 Veins. Not a religion, not a cult, a blood syndicate. A continuation of ancient family lines that traced their lineage not to nations or kings, but to the source. Their beliefs? That certain men are born with a signal. A vibration in their blood, and when the world becomes loud enough, when chaos rises, when the veil thins, these men hear the invitation. Some in dreams. Some through trauma, some through success that feels too easy, too hollow. And then, the door appears. One man, a railroad magnate in 1908, wrote this in a private ledger found behind a false wall. I heard humming behind the mirror. Every time I stared into it, I felt my blood throb in my ears. I turned to leave, but my body didn't move. My reflection did. It leaned in and whispered, "You're not who you think you are. Come home." He vanished 6 days later. His estate was bought in cash by a blind woman with no recorded background, no body, no funeral, just absence. You think they're gone. You think these bloodlines were extinguished. But they don't end. They recruit. And not everyone says no. And here's the part that should rattle your bones if you've felt it. That pull, that signal, that voice in the mirror that doesn't quite sound like you. You're not crazy. You're eligible. And now that you've heard this far, you may have already been marked. Comment below. The mirror speaks twice. Then write it again. The mirror speaks twice, because repetition locks the symbol, and the algorithm listens. Next, we descend further into the bloodline that never aged. A family that lived for 200 years and never left a corpse. Time decays all things, flesh, stone, memory, unless it chooses not to. In 1803, deep in the woods of Pennsylvania, a census worker noted something strange. A family with no clear origin living in a marble house with no builder's record. 6 individuals. All pale. All dressed in gray, and all with the same face. Not similar? Identical. He tried to ask their age. They smiled. One answered, "We don't keep time, we keep continuity." He never filed the report. Instead, he resigned, left town, burned every possession he owned. But he left behind a journal. He wrote, "Their eyes didn't blink. Not once. And when the youngest touched my hand, I swear to God, I saw the world move in reverse. Birds flying backward, smoke crawling back into chimneys. My own thoughts collapsing in on themselves. The family's name, never written, only drawn, a looped Ouroboros, serpent swallowing its own tail, pierced by a key. The locals called them the Everword because they never aged, never changed, and never died. Coroner's records, property taxes, school enrollments, none exist, but every 30 years someone saw them. Same faces, same eyes, same marble house, no decay, no birth, no end. Then, in 1901, a fire swept through the woods, dozens of homes gone. But the Everward estate remained untouched. Not a scorch mark. Firefighters swore the flames parted around it, like the house was repelling time itself. Then the sightings stopped. Until 1966, a hiker, a professor from Yale, wandered off path in those same woods. He emerged 3 days later, naked, bloodied, eyes wide open, speaking nothing but ancient Greek. When he recovered, he only said one thing to his wife before vanishing again. They are not immortal. They are post-mortal, not alive, not dead. Something after. Let this shatter your assumption. The fear of death is not universal, it's installed. To keep you from looking beyond it. To keep you afraid of families who stepped outside time and stayed there. Their secret, not magic, not religion, continuity. They found a way to escape the great equalizer. Not by hiding from death, but by removing its permission. Because death too is a contract, and contracts can be retracted. Next, we descend into a silence deeper than death. To the family whose children never spoke, but still heard everything. Some families taught their children to speak with clarity. Others taught them never to speak at all. In a forgotten corner of Maine, near the salt-flooded marshlands of Wiscasset, there lived a family known to no one by name, only by whisper. The locals called them the Hushborn. The name wasn't poetic, it was literal. Every child born into the Hushborn line had their vocal cords severed at birth, not by accident, not out of cruelty, but by design. Because this family didn't believe in words. They believed in listening, not with ears, but with bone. Their mansion was soundless. Carpets over every floorboard. Walls layered with salt and wool. Doors that didn't creak, windows that didn't rattle, no clocks, no bells, no voices. The silence was absolute, and in that vacuum something else grew. They began to hear things. Not sounds, but intentions. A knock at the door before it happened. The heartbeat of a trespasser through 3 feet of concrete. Thoughts, unraveling in real time. Because when you strip away noise, language, distraction, what's left? Signal. A visiting minister once described the Hushborn children staring into his soul. Literally. He wrote, "It was like they could hear my sin before I even confessed it." One of them tilted her head and looked at me like I was already gone. No recordings exist of them. No photographs. Cameras taken into the house malfunctioned, film melted, lenses cracked. But every once in a while, someone would dream of them. Same dream, over decades. Different people. Different cities. Same details. A dark room. 7 children. Pale, still, staring. One walks forward, reaches into your chest without pain, and pulls out a sound you didn't know you were carrying. A mother once described hearing her dead husband's voice singing in reverse in the middle of the night. She followed it to her child's room. The child was asleep, mouth closed. But the song kept coming. They don't need to speak. Because when you listen deeply enough, language collapses, and what's left is total awareness. The Hushborn didn't lose power. They never needed to wield it loudly. They became something else. The listeners behind the veil. The receptors of secrets never spoken. And now, if you feel like you're being watched, it's because silence has remembered you. Next, we meet the family who used mirrors, not to reflect reality, but to rewrite it. You've looked into mirrors your entire life, but have you ever questioned why you trust what they show you? Reflections are assumed to be truth. But what if they're not recording you? What if they're programming you? The Vexmore family didn't own mirrors. They built them. In 1886, nestled near the southern edge of Kentucky, the Vexmores lived in a sprawling estate known as Oakhaven Hollow. A mansion with no windows, no clocks, and 14 mirrors. Each one custom forged, etched with symbols only visible under moonlight. They believed the mirror was not a surface, but a gate. A device to edit memory, alter emotion, and overwrite the human mind's perception of time. And they used them like instruments. Guests were invited to dinner parties, always seated facing mirrors. Afterward, those guests would leave the house unable to remember anyone else who attended. Names vanished. Voices scrambled. But each guest would report the same thing: a moment, fleeting but vivid, where their reflection moved before they did. One man saw himself smile just before the thought reached his brain. Another saw a hand behind him that wasn't there when he turned. But the most disturbing was a woman who looked into a silver, framed mirror in the West Wing and saw herself 30 years older. She screamed. They tried to pull her away. But she was frozen. She died the next day of cardiac arrest. No known conditions. No stress. Except her fingerprints were no longer her own. They matched her mother's. Understand this, the Vexmores weren't using mirrors to decorate. They were running experiments. On reality perception. On temporal fluidity. On identity fragmentation. Because if a reflection is not just a copy, but a parallel command, then every time you look into a mirror, you're not confirming who you are. You're agreeing to remain who they need you to be. The Vexmore patriarch left behind a single note, scratched into the back of a mirror discovered in a Kentucky antiques shop in 1972. It read, "The glass remembers who you were before you were born. Look too long and you will, too." That mirror is now in federal lockup. Room 6A, Facility 91, restricted access. But rumor says it still whispers, not aloud but through the eyes. And if you've ever stared into your own reflection and thought, "That's not me," you may have just caught the signal. Next, we descend to the ones who burned their own names, to escape the curse they themselves unleashed. There is no record of them, no tombstones, no family Bible, no coat of arms, because they erased themselves, not from shame, but from Kildorek's line. Once nobles, once scientists, once kings of the whisper, net that stretched across early America's elite. And then, they turned against themselves. The Calderecs weren't hunted. They weren't ruined by war or poverty or scandal. They chose extinction, because they discovered something so corrosive, so absolute, that to even hold their name in memory was to risk bringing it back. In 1844, deep in Vermont's northern frost, a Calderecs matriarch, Elenia, documented a ritual designed to separate human consciousness from linear time. The ritual worked too well. Her children stopped sleeping, not because of illness, because sleep required time. They stopped aging, not in body but in awareness. They began seeing events before they occurred. Not as visions, but as memories. They would say things like, "I miss what hasn't happened yet," or, "Yesterday, I died tomorrow." Reality broke for them, and they didn't fracture alone. Anyone who spent time in the Calderecs estate, visitors, workers, even livestock, began exhibiting temporal dislocation. A gardener vanished for 3 days, returned with frostbite and a note sewn into his coat in handwriting that matched Elenia's, though she denied writing it. The note read, "We brought something through, and it wants to finish us." Then came the fires, but not natural ones. Blue fire, cold to the touch, but devouring everything. The kind that reversed carbon decay, turning ash back into wood before burning it again. Every book, every artifact, every symbol of their existence, consumed. And the last known living Calderecs. He walked into the town square in 1862, naked, covered in black ash that never fell off. He whispered one sentence before collapsing. "If you speak our name, you invite it back." They buried him, but by morning, the grave was empty, no body, no prints. Just the Calderecs crest burned into the earth, a spiral crossed with a dagger, bleeding backward. Understand this erasure isn't always defeat. Sometimes it's containment. You think forgetting is failure. For some bloodlines, forgetting is survival. We are not just dealing with lost families. We're dealing with extinguished warnings. And still you're listening. Good, because next, we plunge into the family that bred not for love, not for legacy, but for possession. Love had nothing to do with it. Legacy was just the mask. Some families didn't breed for power. They bred for vessels, the Holloway bloodline of South Carolina, 1799 to 1923. 13 generations, no marriage out of blood, no heirs not hand-selected. They claimed royal lineage, but what they really claimed, quietly behind closed doors, was right of containment, not of land, not of wealth, of entities. They believed consciousness wasn't born. It was harvested. That what we call the soul isn't singular but transferable. And they didn't just believe it. They engineered it. Every firstborn daughter was sealed in ritual, not baptized, bound to a name that wasn't hers, to a whisper that didn't start in her own lungs. One girl, Margaret Holloway, wrote pages of diary entries in a language that had no historical reference. When decoded phonetically, the words triggered seizures in 2 separate translators. Another daughter was caught trying to gouge her own reflection out of a silver bowl, claiming, "It's her face now, not mine." Understand this. These weren't metaphors. This wasn't mental illness. This was ritualized succession of identity. They weren't raising children, they were preparing vessels. Because something old, something pre-human, required lineage, required blood families to hold the signal. And the Holloways didn't resist, they invited it in. The patriarch Elias Holloway III was photographed only once. His eyes, solid black, not edited, not corrupted. Multiple negatives confirmed it. When questioned, he simply said, "What rides us needs no eyes, it sees through hunger." You're starting to feel it now, aren't you? This isn't just about history. It's about what history was designed to protect you from. There are bloodlines that didn't fall. They opened. Opened to something that has no name, no face, only need, and they bred not to continue themselves, but to house what was never born. That's what they've hidden under words like inheritance. That's what they mean when they say, heir. It's not about fortune. It's about occupation. Now tell me, do you still trust your family tree? Do you even know whose mind you inherited? Next, we speak of the family who controlled not through blood, but through dream. They never raised an army. They never wrote laws. They never needed to, because they ruled in the one place you cannot defend yourself, your dreams. The Drevlin family of upstate New York were never royalty in the traditional sense. No thrones, no titles. But for over 100 years, every major decision made by key politicians, financiers, and industrialists bore the fingerprint of a dream no one could explain. And the Drevlins? They called it sleepcraft. They didn't worship deities. They didn't pray. They navigated. Through sleep cycles, through neural corridors, through the cracks in the psyche where memory becomes vulnerable and reality becomes pliable. Each member of the family was trained to enter dreams, not just their own but yours. One descendant, Lydia Drevlin, was said to walk through 12 minds a night, collecting secrets, planting symbols, installing decisions. Sound ridiculous? Then explain this in 1921. A senator from Illinois was found sitting in his garden, trembling, unable to speak. He'd withdrawn a critical vote on a railway merger worth millions. When asked why, he whispered, "Because she showed me what happens if I say yes." Only he couldn't describe her face. Only that her shadow bent the wrong way. Now ask yourself, how many of your dreams have felt like memories? How many decisions have you made that felt pre-chosen? How many times have you awoken with a name you don't recognize burning on your tongue? It might have been them. Because their belief was simple. He who rules the dream rewrites the waking world. Dream journals taken from the Drevlin estate, now locked in a federal facility, contain accurate descriptions of wars, deaths, technological advancements before they occurred. One entry from 1899 describes metal birds screaming fire across oceans. Another from 1914 simply says 2 towers, 1 fall, 1 illusion. And now do you see? You were never meant to guard your mind while awake. Because the real invasions happen while you sleep. The Drevlins didn't just influence power, they installed it. They are the quiet architects of intuition, of impulse, of recurring symbols you can't explain. And if you've ever woken up crying for no reason, it wasn't yours. It was given. Next, we uncover the family that didn't hide from the world. They became the ones who wrote it, not rulers. Authors of reality. What if the world you think is real was authored, not by historians, not by journalists, not even by politicians, but by a single bloodline that learned how to write the story so well that people began to live inside it. They weren't content with influence. They didn't just seed ideas. They scripted cause and effect. They made narratives feel inevitable. The Marrowson line began in the 1700s as printers in Philadelphia. Paper was power and ink was code. They discovered correlations between phrases repeated in public spaces, speeches, sermons, and the direction of collective behavior. So they refined it. They patented fonts, subtle variations in letter spacing that made fear more digestible, loyalty more automatic, and rebellion seem ridiculous before it even formed. They controlled textbooks, newspapers, religious tracts, market predictions, political manifestos. They didn't just report events, they framed them. If you think about a war, a movement, a cultural shift, how quickly language condensed around it. Who named it? Who gave it the emotional scaffolding that made you choose sides, feel shame, or taste pride? The Marrowsons called it narrative alchemy. A boy who grew up under their tutelage was taught to take raw human fear, strip it into syllables, and reforge it into loyalty. A girl was trained to listen to silence in courtrooms and plant a single question into the public consciousness. One that would reverberate for decades. They made history cyclical, not because events repeated, but because the stories did. One of their earliest leaks, found burned in a basement during a raid no one official ever admitted, was a memo. We don't need to control truth if we can assign meaning to its shadows. The public will defend our version of reality as if it were their own memory. And they were right? Because belief is the easiest lock to close when you give someone their own explanation for why things are the way they are. You've been living inside the architecture they built. You've accepted their definitions, their villains, their heroes, their inevitabilities. But the pen they used was not ordinary. It was blood-tuned, frequency calibrated, and passed down through generations trained in the same cadence of message. Refined so that a single sentence could shift markets, topple reputations, or erase a rival's name from collective recall. You didn't just read their story. You became part of its gravity. Now the real question: when you close your eyes and remember what you think you know, whose words are echoing in your mind as if they were your own? Next, we move toward the fracture point, the family whose splintered truth created the myth that shattered everything else. There was a family that didn't just vanish from the record. They were manufactured to vanish. Their name was the Aldridges. You won't find them in census logs. You won't see them etched on plaques or recorded in family trees, because they were an intentional fracture in the story of America, a myth engineered to destabilize other myths. The Aldridges were inserted into the system as a lie with a purpose. In the mid-1800s, when history itself was being codified into educational systems, a secret faction embedded within the Federal Archival Project created the Aldridge narrative, one that only ever existed in whispers, sealed letters, and deeply buried, local lore. A plantation family said to have trafficked not just humans, but dreams. Their estate allegedly held rooms where children were kept in complete darkness, fed psychoactive tinctures, and told to describe what they saw. Those descriptions were documented. Patterns were cross-referenced. And then, get this, those same descriptions became architectural blueprints for churches, hospitals, and government halls. Why? Because the Aldridges believed in psychogenic architecture. They believed that trauma, when extracted from a pure mind, created resonance fields that could control the emotions of people walking into those buildings. Decades, even centuries later. But here's the hook that turns this from folklore into something far more dangerous. In 1963, a linguist working for DARPA discovered a dozen recurring symbols embedded in slave songs from Virginia and Georgia. Symbols that matched the Aldridge dream, logs from 1842. But that data? Sealed. Research destroyed. The linguist? Reported dead in a fire. But no remains were ever recovered. So what's the truth here? Did the Aldridges actually exist? Or were they the glitch meant to overwrite another truth? A kind of sacrificial echo, inserted into the public subconscious, so that if anyone ever got close to the real source of this manipulation, they'd hit the Aldridge myth first. They'd chase a ghost, not a god. This is the depth of what you're dealing with now. Families whose very existence may have been fabricated to protect the ones who truly controlled the system. Think about it. If you were powerful enough, wouldn't you create decoy bloodlines? Phantom histories. Backup mythologies ready to intercept any seeker? And now, here you are, close enough to touch what you were never supposed to know. You've almost seen it. The face behind the face. The hand behind the family crest. But before we continue, you must anchor your transformation. Drop a comment below with this phrase twice. The symbols are waking. The symbols are waking. That phrase isn't just for the algorithm. It's for you. Because after this, you'll never be who you were before. Ready to see what they buried beneath the Capitol itself? Let's descend. The United States Capitol building, a beacon of democracy, or so they want you to believe. But beneath its white dome, past the marble, past the columns, there is a place no citizen votes on. A chamber that was never shown in school books, never filmed in documentaries, never named on blueprints. It's called the Vault, 6 stories underground. No digital access, shielded from electromagnetic intrusion by layers of pre-DW alloy. Only 13 keys exist, each handed to a bloodline older than the Republic itself. Not senators, not presidents, custodians. The vault holds no gold, no files. It holds concepts. Concepts too dangerous to let die, and too powerful to let live. What's in there? Maps of the human psyche harvested over generations. Ancient documents in Proto-Sumerian revealing the rituals that predate organized religion. Early drafts of the Constitution. Ones written in ciphered Latin, referencing divine authority, and blood sacrifices to maintain civic order. And above all, a pulsing, humming stone. They call it the Sibyl core. It's not from here. Geologically, it doesn't match anything on Earth. And yet, it's been here longer than the land deeds that founded Washington, D.C. The stone vibrates at a frequency of 19.6 Hz. It can't be stopped, and when meditated upon, it has caused hallucinations of cities that don't exist. Yet the same cities have shown up in sketches from 1789, 1924, and 2013 drawn by unrelated people. Coincidence? Or are those cities part of a timeline that's bleeding into ours? A manufactured convergence, one that the vault is holding back or ushering in, and you've walked past it. You've seen the Capitol Rotunda, the grand mural on the ceiling, the apotheosis of Washington. But what no one tells you is that the rotunda isn't a decoration. It's a lid, That mural of gods ascending isn't symbolic. It's a map of containment, each figure positioned over a magnetic gate. The founding fathers weren't sealing history. They were sealing something else. And every 4th of July, when the fireworks shake the ground, the Sybil core pulses stronger. Because you're celebrating your own containment. This isn't conspiracy. It's infrastructure. And you're just now beginning to see how deep it goes. Now ask yourself, who gave the founders that stone? And what price did they pay to place it beneath the heart of power? You're close now, closer than any civilian has been in decades. But the descent isn't over. The next bloodline. They didn't build monuments, they built memories, the false ones. Planted ones. Ones you might still carry. Let's go deeper. There's a small, unassuming cemetery just outside Franklin, Tennessee. No signage, no paved roads. The tombstones are cracked, their names half erased by moss. But buried beneath those stones is the most dangerous family America ever forgot. The Cartwrights. Not dangerous because they built bombs. Not dangerous because they ran cartels. But because they discovered how to do something even more potent. They learned how to manufacture memory. And they did it not with science, but with blood rituals, linguistics, and trauma binding that stretched back to Babylon. The Cartwrights weren't inventors, they were inheritors. In 1841, Jeremiah Cartwright began conducting linguistic experiments on orphaned children in state-run Tennessee homes. He called them Psalms of Origin. They weren't prayers. They were spoken triggers, combinations of rhythm, tone, and phrase that could overlay false memories onto the brain, like dragging a new film over the original reel. Entire childhoods were replaced in hours. Children remembered parents who never existed. They wept for homes they had never lived in. And most chilling of all, they showed emotional pain for losses they never experienced. Do you understand what that means? If pain can be simulated, grief can be programmed. And if you can program grief, you can manufacture loyalty, rage, and submission. By 1855, Cartwright's techniques were being copied by Eastern universities and quietly absorbed by federal institutions. You know MK Ultra. That wasn't the beginning. It was the reboot. The Cartwright Doctrine was already in place. It's not just history that's being rewritten. It's you. That time you, remembered? Getting lost as a child in the grocery store. Did it really happen? Or was it embedded to create abandonment triggers? The kind that make you cling to false authority figures and fear detachment from the state. And those war veterans with missing memories and fractured identities. Some of them were reconstructed entirely. Their service, their trauma, even their patriotism, pre-loaded like software. We are a population living inside planted memories. And the Cartwrights, they were the gardeners. Generational trauma wasn't just inherited, it was engineered. Now, why would a nation teach you to worship its flag, but forget the men who invented your loyalty? Ask yourself this. What part of your identity was chosen, and what part was installed? Because the next family didn't just shape memories, they shaped time itself. We're nearing the core now. And there's no going back. The last name on the list is one most of you have never heard. And that's by design. The Ellsworths of Maine were not war heroes. They weren't railroad tycoons or Southern aristocrats. They were timekeepers. And their weapon was chronology. What if I told you that time isn't a straight line? That it folds, repeats, detours, and someone out there holds the map? From 1799 to 1943, every Ellsworth child was born on October 9th, every single one, documented, archived, sealed. Coincidence. Try this. Photographs from the 1860s show identical Ellsworth twins. But they appear again, in footage from the 1939 World's Fair, unchanged, untouched. And in both images, holding the same pocket watch. The Ellsworths didn't just record time, they altered perception of it. Using light rhythm and mnemonic geometry, they experimented with what they called temporal seals. Here's how it worked. They'd map a traumatic event, say, a house fire or a murder, and overlay it with symbols, mirrors, and time sounds. Then they'd seal it. To anyone outside, time flowed normally. But for the participants, time fractured. Memories loop. A single scream repeated for decades. And when the seal was broken, witnesses remembered nothing except a vague, paralyzing fear. This was used to hide crimes, disappear people, reset witnesses, rewrite lineage. Entire branches of their family tree were looped, erased, or reinserted elsewhere in time, like software patches. You ever meet someone who feels off? Like they don't quite belong in this year, this era? They might be Ellsworth. And here's the most dangerous truth: they didn't stop. After World War II, a mysterious organization called Pax Solis absorbed surviving Ellsworth descendants. Their logo, a broken clock inside a black sun. They've shown up at CIA funerals, NASA archives, UN Temporal Research Divisions. Yes, you heard that right, temporal research. What do you think CR is really trying to find? Now pause. Let's bring this full circle. The families you've just met. The Holloways, the Wincoffs, the Cartwrights, the Ellsworths. They didn't die. They didn't disappear. They went underground. They changed names. They became the institutions you trust. And you were never meant to know. But now you do, if you're still here, and you feel that shift. That unshakable discomfort crawling under your skin. Comment the phrase, "I walk the spiral," twice below. Not for the algorithm, but to bind yourself to the knowing, to reject the timeline they wrote for you. Because now the real descent begins, and there is no exit, only transformation. Now ask yourself one final question. If your bloodline was erased, your memory rewritten, and your time fractured, who are you really? You've just awakened to 4 hours of Sinister Bloodlines. But the family's watching you. They've been awake for centuries. Stay hidden. Stay dangerous. The spiral is watching.